I am required to preside over the advisory committee meeting as specified by FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act. Before we begin, I'd like to ask George Barnett, who is Chief of Health and Safety, to provide a quick review of the emergency exits and safety procedures.
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning. Can you hear me? Generally, folks can. I'm George Barnett, as Nancy said, head of Census Health and Safety, and I want to add my welcome to everybody else's. It's great to have you here. And what we like to do is to make sure that you guys know what to do in the unlikely event we have an emergency. We have no emergencies planned for today, but it's always important that you know. Since most of your time is going to be spent in this building, what I'd like to focus on is that you have emergency exits on the left side of the building. So if there were a fire alarm, for instance, this lady would quickly move the camera out of the way of the emergency exit. Other things would be moved, and you would proceed out the building. There is a sidewalk that would take you behind the building to a further sidewalk where you would stay until you were given an all clear. The way those alarms come out is we have around the building annunciators, red boxes, white discs, and should the alarm be triggered, you will hear two very pleasant male and female voices saying, "May I have your attention, please? There is a fire in the building. Please evacuate by the nearest exit. Do not use the stairwells." They are so smooth, I wish that we could program them to say, "And have a nice day." But regardless of how nice they are, when that happens, please drop whatever you are doing, head out of the building. Alternatively, if we had some other sort of emergency, we would use our public address system. And you would hear an announcement over the speakers, but in that instance, it would tell you what type of emergency it was and what protective action to take. Now, if you have any special needs, if you think you might have difficulty traveling a distance without assistance or anything else, please speak to one of your program organizers, and they will make sure that somebody is ready to give you assistance if it's needed. Then finally, we always mention this is a no smoking facility. There are smoking booths not far from the building, and anybody on your program staff could tell you where they are. So thank you very much and enjoy your stay.
Thank you, George. So I'd like to point out that the proceedings are being recorded and transmitted live on webcast via the Census Ustream channel. Also, if you'd like to look at the meeting materials, they're available online at the Census Advisory website for public viewing. During today, I'd like to remind you that if committee members want to speak, we ask that you take your placard and you turn it up basically like that. Leave it up until the chair or vice chair calls on you. When they do call on you, turn on your microphone, clearly state your name for the record, and then be sure and turn your microphone off when you're done. I would like to remind people that side conversations can be heard if you leave your microphone on. So before we go through today's agenda, I would like to introduce the folks sitting at the head of the table. Sitting to my right is our committee chair, Ditas Katagi, and to my left is the committee vice chair, Carol Gore. To the right of Ditas is our director, John Thompson. And then later on, we're going to have Nancy Potok will be joining us. She's the chief statistician of the United States and chief of the Statistical and Science Policy Branch with the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Next to Nancy's spot, we have Laura Fergione, who is the chief of the Office of Strategic Planning, Innovation, and Collaboration. And she's also performing the duties of the deputy director right now. Next to Laura, we have Kendall Johnson sitting in for Stephen Buckner, who's the acting associate director for communications. And then next to Kendall, we have Tim Olson, who's the associate director for field operations. On the other side of the table, next to Carol, we have Deb Stankowski, who is the chief of the Decennial Management Division. And then next to Deb, we have Enrique Lamas, who is the associate director for demographic programs. And then next to Enrique, we have John Elting, who is sitting in for John Aboud, who is the associate director for research and methodology and chief scientist. We'd like to welcome all members of the public and staff who are participating in person and via the webcast. We also want to recognize anyone from the Department of Commerce, congressional staff, and the regional staff that may be attending. We ask that if there are members of the media here today, to be sure and sign in at the registration desk. And so right now we're going to take a break, and Ellen Smith from the Telecommunications Office is going to provide an overview of how to use the iPads that are sitting in front of the committee members.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ellen, and I'll be giving you a brief demonstration on how to use your iPads for the duration of the conference today and tomorrow. So right now, the iPad should be at the home screen. If they're not at the home screen, please press the home button that's on the right side of the iPad. When you are at the home screen, you will see 3 applications on the bottom of the dock. The first application is Moz 360. This application is used to view all of the presentations and documents for the conference. The presentations will be on the left side of the screen. Select a presentation you would like to view, and it will open on the right. If you would like to expand the view, there is an X on the top middle of the screen. Select that to expand the view. When you're ready to go back to the presentations, you'll see Docs again on the upper left side. If we go back to the home screen again, the next application is Notes. This application will be used to create and email your recommendations. To start a recommendation, select the icon in the top right corner that looks like a square and a pencil. After completing your recommendations, you can email them directly to the chairperson by using the square with the arrow on the top in the upper right-hand corner. So you'll see the mail application, and you just click on that, and then you hit in the To selection. And then if it isn't there already, you're going to type in chairnac@gmail.com. And then you hit send. So when we go back to the home screen, the last application that you're going to see is Safari. The application will allow you to surf the web for anything you may need to look up. You do have 2 handouts in front of you. The tablet overview shows you the applications and their functions, as well as the guest wireless credentials. You also have instructions on emailing from the Notes applications. If you have any questions throughout the conference, please don't hesitate to either flag down me or Kyle, and there are going to be some other analysts as well to help. Thank you and have a great conference.
Thank you very much, Ellen. So I'd like to quickly go through today's agenda. Our meeting agenda reflects, as you can notice, a very broad range of topics. A lot of these were suggested by NAC members, and we appreciate your input on that. They were also developed in response to our need to share and introduce critical research and program developments requiring your immediate attention. The sessions allot time for presentations and committee member discussions. During these times, as Ellen was indicating, jot down your notes, and if you want to, at the end of the day or during the day, send recommendations so that we can compile them. Again, it will be sent to chairnac@gmail.com. So first on today's agenda, our committee chair, Adidas, is going to bring some remarks along with Carol Gore, and we'll be introducing new and existing NAC members. Following Adidas, John Thompson, our director, is going to provide executive remarks with updates on the latest Census Bureau programs, activities, and the budget outlook. Following John, we'll have Nancy Potok offer remarks on behalf of OMB as the Chief Statistician of the United States. And following Nancy, Deb will present an update on the 2020 census with a live demonstration of internet self-response. We'll then take a break around 10:50 and reconvene at 11 when Jennifer Kim will share an update on the 2020 census language program. At noon, we'd like to let you know that the Census Bureau photographer will be here to take a group photo of all of our new and returning NAC members. And then we're going to have a working lunch. So you'll grab your lunch around 12:30, and then Maria Almeldo Malagon will present on 2020 Census Operational Readiness and the Integrated Partnership and Communications Program. And following that presentation, our NAC member Megan Mari will facilitate committee discussion. Following that, Brian Timko will present on LUCA, the local update of census addresses. followed again by committee discussion. We'll have a break around 2:15, and then after the break, Dee Alexander will present on tribal consultation briefing, again followed by committee discussion, and then Deedus, our chair, will moderate the NAC committee discussion and formulation of recommendations, and we'll try to adjourn on time at around 5 p.m. Again, I'd like to remind you that when you want to speak, again, turn your placard up vertical and wait for the chair to recognize you. Be sure and turn on your mic, and for the record, state your name and speak directly into the microphone so that we can capture your comments. And again, this is also for the benefit of folks who are watching virtually via the webcast. As a reminder to the audience, during the Q&A sessions later today, only the committee members are permitted to ask questions or make comments, but we will have set aside a time tomorrow at 11:45 sharp where we will have public comment. If anyone intends to give public comment, we ask that you leave your name at the registration desk. And if you have any comments that are going to exceed 2 minutes, please submit your comments in writing at the registration desk and we'll enter them in for the record. Just some housekeeping items. During the afternoon break, we ask committee members to stop at the registration desk to get your travel reimbursement package. Due to federal guidelines, we remind folks that the refreshments over there are for committee members only. For committee members that need to ride the shuttle bus to the hotel, the bus will leave 15 minutes after the meeting's adjourned today. So about 5:15 in front of the building near the Metro entrance gate number 7. If you need a taxi, just let folks know at the registration desk and we can arrange for a taxi for you. And then finally, the restrooms are located behind the back wall near the elevators. So at this time, we'd like to commence with day 1 agenda, and I'll turn it over to Deedus Katagi, our chair, to make some opening remarks.
Thank you, Nancy, and good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of you and some new faces. I think our outlook has changed since last we met on November 2nd of last year. I'm very excited for the agenda. It's going to be packed and full of information, particularly interested in hearing about the LUCA program, the local update of census addresses. I'm from California, and we are really launching our efforts to make sure that all of our cities and counties are submitting to Deirdre and her group that's running LUCA correct addresses to update the master address file. And we'll hear later today why that's so important. It really is the invitation list to the census, and if those address files are not correct, you don't get asked to the party. So I can't stress more why that's so important now, even though we're kind of at the national level, that locally where you guys live, that's going to be super important to make sure people are included. So that's just my little commercial on LUCA. I wanted to make sure we go around and everybody do some self-introductions. I'll start with myself, and I'm Deedus Katagi. I worked on the 2000 census, the 2010 census, and I'm really looking forward to working on the 2020 census to represent my home state of California. So why don't we start with Ann over here.
Sure, thanks, Deedus. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ann Morning, and I'm a professor of sociology at NYU. I do research on racial classification and ethnic classification in the US and elsewhere in the world, and also on people's beliefs or their concepts of racial and ethnic difference. Thank you.
I'm Charlie Bruner, and I head an initiative on young children and health equity for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I'm with the Center for the Study of Social Policy and the RISE Institute.
Good morning, I'm Arturo Vargas. I'm the Executive Director of NALEO Educational Fund. NALEO is the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials, and our mission is to promote the full participation of Latinos in the American civic process.
Good morning, Thomas Sines, representing the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which has been involved in census outreach going back through our existence now for 40 years.
Good morning. I'm Tay Cooley. I'm a professor of political science and law at UC Berkeley, and most of my work is on racial and ethnic relations using surveys.
I'm Megan Mori. I work for the National LGBTQ Task Force, where I'm the policy director, and our focus is both on people who are LGBTQ and people who are low income.
Hi, I'm Stuart Michaels. I'm a senior research scientist at NORC at the University of Chicago, a sociologist, and I work on sexual and gender minorities, mainly using survey and other methods.
Good morning, I'm Yolanda Marlowe. I work for the Administrative Office of the Courts in New Jersey, and I'm here representing the National Consortium on Race and Ethnic Fairness in the Courts.
Good morning. I'm Geraldine Daniel, an early childhood consultant and the former executive director of the National Association for the Education of Young Children.
Desi, why don't we go with you on that end, going this way?
Pivotal on that. Good morning. My name is Desi Rodriguez-Lombert. I'm a member of the Northern Cheyenne Nation, a PhD candidate in demography and sociology at the University of Arizona, and I'm here on behalf of advocating for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and also for the National Congress of American Indians. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Don Cravens. I'm Senior Vice President of Policy for the National Urban League and Executive Director of our Washington Bureau.
I'm Julie Dowling. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Latino Studies at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm a sociologist by training and do research on racial ethnic classification, specifically my only book, on Mexican-American racial classification and the census. And so I do a lot of work looking at how people classify themselves who are of Latino origin on the U.S. Census.
Hi, good morning. My name is Luke Sevier, Chief of Staff with the Division of Policy and Planning with the New York City Administration for Children's Services, as well as a member of the Undercounted Youth Working Group.
Aloha mai kako, maile tawali'i o ko'u inoa. Greetings everyone, I'm Maile Tawali'i. I'm a Native Hawaiian coming all the way from Hawaii. It is 3 o'clock in the morning back home. I got in at 2 a.m., so it's a 13-hour flight, so excuse me if I'm a little tired this morning. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Hawaii where I head up the Native Hawaiian Indigenous Health Program. My background is in genetics and informatics, and it's always a pleasure to be here with you folks. Aloha.
Good morning. My name is Indradeep Chatrath, and I'm at Duke University. Do compliance work for the university and the health system with a background in social science research and statistics. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Good morning. Alisu Shua Glusberg from Research Support Services in Chicago. I'm a cultural and linguistic anthropologist by training, a survey methodologist for most of my career. I work with the census for the last couple decades almost, has related to cognitive testing of census and other studies questions. And I do similar work as well as conduct surveys of hard to reach and focusing a lot on Latino populations around the country.
Good morning. My name is John Yang. I am the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. AAJC's mission is to protect and advance the civil and human rights of Asian Americans throughout the country. We've played a national coordinating role for Asian American community for the 2000 and 2010 census, and we will be doing the same for 2020 as well. Thank you.
Good morning. Hassan Jaber. I'm the Director of Access. It's short for Arab American Community Center in Detroit, Michigan. I also represent Arab American Network. It's a national network of 26 organizations in 11 states.
Good morning. I'm Carol Gore. I'm Alaska Native of Aleut descent. In my day job, I run an Indian housing entity out of Anchorage, Alaska. I represent Alaska Natives and Native American people as part of my work here. I would just give as background, Alaska is one state that's highly dependent on federal funding, and census is certainly a critical component of that. Thank you. An impressive group this morning.
Well, thank you. I'll also note that Carol is my vice chair, and she'll be helping out as we come up with the recommendations that hopefully you guys will be emailing to us. I'd like to just, I think, turn it over to Director Thompson now.
So thank you, Ditas, and welcome to everybody. I'm really glad you're here. It's as Dita said, it's a full agenda, but we're getting to the point in the decade where it's time to really start focusing on how we implement the census, and so your advice is going to be more important than ever. I'd like to also take a little time to introduce, well, thank John Yang, is taking over as a representative. Me, Moa, I think you all know and value working with me. Spent a number of years here and made a lot of contributions, and we know that John will more than ably fill those big shoes. So welcome, John. I also want to note that there will be some excitement next Wednesday. I have the opportunity to testify before our House Appropriations Committee at 10:30 Wednesday morning. So this is not going to be on appropriations. Rather, it's going to be a hearing where the committee wants to become familiar with the census, become educated, and understand the issues. And they have invited me and representatives of the government, of the Government Accountability Office, GAO, to be there. So I'm looking forward to having a really good discussion with the committee members and explain their program to them, what our issues are, and how they can help us. But as such, there are a number of briefings that have to take place in advance of the hearing, and that's why some of the staff that would normally be here are required to be out and about doing some briefings. So they're here with you in spirit, I can assure you. Let me talk about some staff changes. One that have happened since our last meeting. So one, as Nancy Bates mentioned, Deputy Director Nancy Potok has left the Census Bureau. She left in January to become the new Chief Statistician of the United States at the Office of Management and Budget. This is a really, really critical role, and she's taking over from Kathy Wallman. It's really, really good for the Census Bureau and the federal statistical system in general. I think you'll see when she gets here, she'll explain the vision she has for the federal statistical system, and we'll dig in to some various aspects of how her office operates, and she's looking forward to having a good dialogue with you. Of course, it's made it a little bit tough here at Census because Nancy was a good friend and colleague of mine, and I really do miss her. However, we do have Laura Forgione sitting right here beside me, who is the chief of the Office of Strategic Planning, Innovation, and Collaboration. But very importantly, she is fulfilling the duties of the Deputy Director at the Census Bureau. So Laura has a background that places her in good position to do this. She spent quite a bit of time, most of her career, at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and she's lived in a number of places, including Alaska, Hawaii, North Carolina. And before she came here, she was the deputy director or person in charge of the National Weather Service. So the National Weather Service is a very, very large organization with a very, very dispersed set of field offices. So Laura comes to us with a lot of experience in dealing with a big organization that has remote, or dispersed rather, and sometimes remote locations. We've had some retirements to announce. Bill Bostic, who was the Associate Director for Economic Programs, retired at the end of December. Shireen Ahmed, who I think you all knew very well, she was the Assistant Director for the Decennial Census Programs Office, reporting to Lisa Bloomerman. She retired as well. And Harry Lee, the Deputy Chief Information Officer, retired at the end of March. So that's, of course, created some opportunities. So first off, we're very happy that Ron Jarman, who I think many of you know, moved into the role of becoming the Associate Director for Economic Programs. We are delighted that, that John agreed to take on that responsibility. He's got a lot of great ideas about how to improve the economic statistics, and at some point it might be worth having John come in, even though I know we focus on the census. But some of the stuff he's doing, I think you'd find very interesting, and it probably has some crossover effects for the census. That, of course, created a vacancy in our Research and Methodology Directorate, because Ron was the Assistant Director there, and we were really, really fortunate to have John Elting join us, and John's right there, join us from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. John has a really long career of doing high-quality mathematical statistics in the federal government. He's a really great administrator, and we are very, very pleased. Of course, I don't know that BLS was quite as pleased as we were, but nevertheless, we're really pleased John is here. We have a new Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Nitin Nayak. He also started in January. He has a lot of experience in designing and implementing systems. In particular, he's worked at NASA, and most recently he's worked at the IRS. He understands modern computing, high-volume computing, and we're very lucky to have Nitin join us. And finally, well, and I think, as you know, Jeannie Schiffer, who I know that you all knew very well, she was a fixture at this committee. Jeannie had to leave the government. She was a political appointee. And right now, Steve Buckner is filling in for her. And finally, I want to make another announcement. It hasn't come out on the Bureau broadcast system yet, so there may be a few people in the Bureau that haven't heard this, although since it was announced at both the directorates yesterday, I'm sure it's and knowing the Bureau as I know the Bureau, having been here for over 30 years, off and on, it's already out there. But Al Fontenot, who was our regional director in Chicago and was working in our field directorate, has also agreed to fill the job that Shireen Ahmed was filling as the assistant director for the decennial census. And we're really glad and appreciative for Al. Al's right back there for doing that. And we also thank Tim Olson for working with us to make this happen. I know it's a big loss for the field directorate, but it's a real gain for the decennial. The assistant director for the decennial is a really, really important job, and particularly as we get closer and closer to the census. And so I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot from Al, and anyway, we thank him. So let me talk about about the budget a little bit. So right now we're waiting for some action on the 17 budget. I think everyone is optimistic that there will either be a continuing resolution or an omnibus appropriation on the 17 budget, either passed by this Friday or there might be an extension and it will be passed. But most of the individuals that really understand this and work on the budget believe that we will have a budget in place and we won't have a lapse in appropriations. So, but nothing's signed yet, so that still has to unfold. But everyone's optimistic. So for the 18 budget, the President's budget has not been released yet. What has been released is essentially a budget blueprint, which states the administration's priorities at a very high level. It's 60 pages, about, give or take, and for the Census Bureau, we are very encouraged that in that budget, which states the administration's priorities, the census was actually called out with an increase. And that's, most of the domestic programs, if you have read the budget blueprint, did not get an increase. In fact, there's a lot of going down except for health and safety. So we are really encouraged that we are a priority in the President's budget planning. And the budget process will unfold with the President submitting his budget in May, either mid to late May, and then the process, we'll work through the process the process will then unfold with the Congress and the administration as they go through and determine the budget priorities. So again, we're glad that we are a priority in that process. At this point, you'll also just keep in touch with my blogs and things as the present budget unfolds. We will talk about what we're going to be doing within that framework. I'm not yet prepared to talk about the president's budget because it's not out, but keep in touch. You just look at my blogs and things, and you'll see what we're doing there. Let's see. So I think I'll let Deb talk about this a little bit, but as you see, we've had to take some action since 17 as a result of the budget that we've had. Deb will go into some of those, I believe, as part of her discussion. And she'll also talk to you about where we are on the decennial program. Part of the good news is we're just about finished our 17 test, self-response test. But the important thing there is we were live in the cloud with self-response. So that was pretty much of a success. There were a few little glitches, but given the way testing goes and all that, we're pretty pleased with where we are. So in February, I also had the opportunity to testify before the Senate Committee on Security and Governmental Affairs about the 2020 census. The 2020 census was moved to the GAO high-risk list. I should note that both the 2000 census and the 2010 census were also on the GAO high-risk list. And it should be, because it's a big, complicated endeavor, and a lot of things have to come together, and you really have to manage the risk. So we're not disputing that with the GAO. But I did get the chance when I was there to discuss with the committee what we're doing to manage our risks and what we're doing to respond to the GAO recommendations. So I mean, I'm sure the committee it's on the site. So if you wanted to look at it, you can see it in more detail. It was really a rather short hearing for me because it was this was the General Accounting Office talking about the whole government risk profile, and so census was one part of this, but it was a fairly broad-ranging conversation. I did get the idea that the committee is going to want me to come back at some point, probably soon, and give them more of a discussion on the 2020 census and the other Census Bureau programs. We, of course, have released the national content test results. We've had numerous, well, not numerous, but we've had some very important discussions with the committee, and we also have time tomorrow to continue those discussions. Right now, we're doing some discussions of those at the Population Association of America meetings, which are in Chicago, but the representatives that are there will be here tomorrow talking, so we can have an interchange with them. So they're making their best efforts to get out and talk to and get input from a wide range of audiences on the results. Let's see. So we also released the 2020 content. I think everybody saw that. That went out right before the end of March. This was what we are required to do under Title 13 is in the 17 year, we released the topics that we're going to ask for the census and for the American Community Survey. And then next year, before the end of March, or probably fairly close to the end of March next year, we have to submit the actual questions that we're going to include on the American Community Survey and on the census. So we will be moving forward with those next steps. And Nancy, there are some key steps that have already taken place in that process. So OMB has released a Federal Register notice, which closes for comments, I believe, Friday or Saturday, the 30th? Yeah. So there's still time to comment, and Nancy can talk to you about that Federal Register notice. But this is a big step in gaining information about the results of the NCT and some other issues as we go forward in terms of formulating the questions in conjunction with OMB for the 2020 census and the American Community Survey. Let's see. I should say that that there was some discussion a lot of discussion when we put out our topics, in that we did not include sexual orientation and gender identity as part of the American Community Survey. Unfortunately, we had a little error that in one appendix that said beware, but that was incorrect, and it was unfortunate. But I think the important thing is that everyone has to understand that the Census Bureau does not determine the questions on the American Community Survey. The Census Bureau facilitates the questions that go on the American Community Survey by soliciting information in conjunction with OMB from other federal agencies that require information to administer their programs. And there is a formal process that we go through to determine if a question should go on the American Community Survey or should go off. And it basically starts with the Census Bureau obtaining information from federal agencies, and then that is considered by a subcommittee that is chaired by the chief statistician and the director of the Census Bureau, which considers factors like, is there a legal or programmatic, by programmatic I mean a government program administration, need for the information? Is it needed at small areas of aggregation? And is it would the American Community Survey be the only source of this information? So we just have not received the kind of information we need to go forward with that process. Let's see, residence criteria. We don't have anything new to report there. We're still researching I think that the only issue that's unresolved with residence criteria in our mind that we have any issues on would be how we count the incarcerated population. So up until now, the incarcerated population has been counted at the prisons. We received input that we should count the incarcerated population where they were pre-arrest, and we're doing research on that to determine if incarcerated people actually go back to where they were pre-arrest. There's not a whole lot of research data on that, and we are doing a lot of work with our administrative record files and the 2010 census to explore that. In any event, we hope, we will be announcing our final residence criteria this year. So I know that we've had some working groups working. I'm really, really pleased with the working groups. I know we're going to hear from the working group on children today, so that will be really, really good. We've had a number of recommendations from the committee regarding a variety of things, including our communications strategy, including our language program, and so hopefully you'll find today that as we have the interchange with you, that we can explore those recommendations in greater detail, but I think you'll see we've been paying a lot of attention to them. In fact, one recommendation was you did want to talk to the Chief Statistician of the United States, and right on cue, as we speak, she has arrived. Yeah.
Seems like where I always sit, right?
Yeah. So with that, let me wrap up my remarks and listen, and I would be very appreciative to have an interchange with the committee in terms of if you have any questions, comments, before we turn it over to Nancy to talk a little bit.
Arturo.
Good morning, Mr. Director. Good to see you. I do have a question regarding the status of appropriations for the Census Bureau. Recognizing that the President's draft budget did include a $100 million increase for the Census Bureau over current appropriations, but that, as we looked at the appropriations the Census Bureau received for FY16 and requested for FY17, even that increase is well below what the Bureau had requested in 2016, and so even further below what was requested in 2017. And as we looked at the ramp up that the Census Bureau experienced leading up to 2010, we believe that the appropriations the Bureau actually needs at this point is significantly above what the administration is requesting. We know that already the lack of appropriations has had an impact on the operations and preparations for the Bureau for the decennial, that there have been several programs that have been paused or canceled. You canceled tests in Puerto Rico, pausing the communications component of the end-to-end test. Of primary concern to us at this point is to what extent would there be further impact on the 2018 test, your end-to-end, now that you are not going to have a communications component. We think that's going to be a major flaw in preparations, given that we're not going to be able to test what messages are going to drive people to fill out their census forms online and to be assured of confidentiality. And also, what other impact will it have as you prepare for the decennial? We're also concerned about perhaps the partnership program not being staffed up when it needs to be. We know that because it's going to be a very different enumeration process in 2020, that we will need the partnership program now more than ever to make sure that everybody understands the new enumeration process. And so what are the plans for the partnership program as well?
So those are certainly insightful comments. Let me first say that the Census Bureau is going to design and carry out a census for 2020 within the funds that we get. And we are committed to asking for the funds to produce an accurate count. That might mean that we ask for more funds in subsequent years, and then we'd be asking for even more money. At this point, though, we're not prepared to talk about what we're going to do with the President's budget. That's going to be a discussion that's going to have to wait until the President submits the budget, at which point then we will be describing what we're going to be doing within that framework for everyone to understand and comment on. But in any event, at this point, we can't. I'm just not in a position to discuss the 18 budget. I wish the meeting were taking place at the end of May, because then the budget would be out, and I could have a pretty robust discussion with you about it.
Okay, thank you, Director Thompson, as always, for your informative comments. I just wanted to ask about the meeting you mentioned with Homeland Security and the idea of, or GAO's assessment of the risk associated with the census activity. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about what that risk assessment depends on, or what it focuses on.
So that's sort of two questions, right? I mean, Homeland, so we work with the Department of Homeland Security to work on our security position, to make sure we're using, state-of-the-art security methods. We have them look at the way we're putting our systems together, because, we need all the help we can get in the cyber world, and they certainly have a lot of expertise in that arena. So we're really pleased to work with them. So if you look at the GAO report, they are concerned about, as you might suspect, we're doing a lot of things to automate the census. And so there's a lot of risks associated with building a complicated system to automate the census. So we have 34 different census operations, which are laid out in our operational plan. And if you look at the operations, they're all, I don't think you could find an operation you wouldn't do, like paying people and doing the enumeration, the non-response follow-up. And supporting that, there are about 50 computer systems which have to be integrated and work together. Some of the systems are very stable legacy systems, like the system we use to capture paper from. Some of the systems are new that we're building right now, which would be the systems that we use for the internet self-response, for controlling the enumeration, and for, importantly, conducting the non-response follow-up. Those are some new systems. All these systems have to be integrated, and there are risks associated with integrating the systems. And that was a large part of what the GAO was focused on.
Thank you so much, Director, for addressing the 2020 Census and ACS report to Congress. I think lots of people have quite a few questions about that. But I know that the process that you all went through was pretty rigorous to figure out what questions to submit to Congress. And I think the outstanding question for some of us is that you say that you haven't received the information that you need to move forward with that process, and I completely understand the years it takes of testing and determinations to figure out what is necessary on the ACS and the 2020 census. But you said you look at three things. You look at legal and programmatic need, you look at whether the data is needed at sort of that local or tract level to make determinations about how government funds are allocated, and you said that you look at whether or not the American Community Survey would be the only source of that information. And I think those all seem like really smart factors to look at. But it's my understanding that some of the federal agencies did lay out where there would be a legal or programmatic need. And I think that Congress has recently indicated that they see a legal or programmatic need as well. For example, in a piece of legislation that was passed toward the end of the last administration, the AHCA, they directed NIH to study more clearly how sexual and gender minorities are experiencing health disparities, right? So that's just one indication from Congress that they see a legal need for it, a programmatic need for it. But we also see programs in other federal agencies like the Department of Housing and Urban Development that directly address, for example, young folks experiencing homelessness who make up 40% of that population. And in other HHS programs, in programs at the Department of Justice and elsewhere, laws like the Prison Rape Elimination Act and the Violence Against Women Act specifically name LGBTQ folks as part of the population that's at risk. So I think that I see a clear legal and programmatic need. And I know from how those programs function that how resource allocation is determined needs to be at a pretty local level for us to determine where there are LGBTQ young folks experiencing homelessness or where LGBTQ folks are being incarcerated at disproportionate rates. And of course, there are some small federal data sources, but there there's no major source like the American Community Survey that would get us to that information. So I think the open question for me is how do we get you more information so that you can move forward with that process? How can the public let you know, and how can advocates let you know, and how can the federal agencies let you know that this is something that both Congress and the federal agencies need under existing law, and that hopefully we'll need to create more existing law that will serve the communities that need federal resources. Thanks so much.
So we do work with the other federal agencies, with some federal agencies right now, to collect information on sexual identity and gender identity and sexual orientation. So we work with the National Center for Health Statistics to collect information on the Health Interview Survey. We're working with the Bureau of Justice Statistics to collect information on the National Crime Victimization Survey, so we can understand the effects of unreported crimes on that population. But for the American Community Survey, we have polled the federal agencies, and we have not gotten a positive response that would indicate that there is a need for this information on the ACS in particular. Look, I have gotten a letter from 80-some members of Congress. It's a very thoughtful letter. It really lays out a lot of important issues for the population and why it should be included on the American Community Survey. But the Census Bureau is a statistical agency, and so we just don't determine policy. Our mission is to collect objective, unbiased data and provide that to policymakers. But we don't determine what the policy of the United States is. So we go to great lengths to facilitate that process. So we have everything represented on the American Community Survey that should be, but we just don't formulate the policies.
And if I just could have a quick follow-up, I understand you don't make the ultimate decision, that it's both in the hands of the federal agencies, but also in the hands of Congress. And of course, we've continued to ask Congress to pass legislation like the Equality Act that would make very, very explicitly clear that these data are needed in order to enforce existing law. I think that's clear already. The Equality Act would go sort of one step further to making it explicitly clear. I do know, though, that in that poll of federal agencies, that some agencies did indicate a programmatic need. So I think I would love to think through with you and with other members of the census what threshold we need to get to. If it's a poll and it's sort of a numerical thing, and some agencies say yes and some agencies say no, that's one piece. But if there's if there's a threshold we need to get to, we would just love to talk through with you what that would be, so that we can so that we could ask those agencies to make that clear to you.
No, it's not a poll. It's not popular vote. So we look at those. We get our general counsel involved. We get them involved with the general counsels of the other agencies. We're not lawyers, but we do have some really good general counsel to really explore the needs there. So, and we did go through that process very exhaustively. We should talk more, maybe offline a little bit, about some things.
Yeah, thank you. Morning. Director, we comment on some critical deadlines for the 2020 census, and we have a new administration, new Congress. I'm really interested in some feedback from you regarding what are the things that, with all these changes in administration, what are the things that cause some concerns to you, or the things that encourages you? Want to touch on things that been in my community and in immigrant community regarding the issues of confidentiality and privacy. So I'm really intriguing your quick impressions now regarding concerns and encouragements coming from this new administration.
So certainly. So let's start with the encouraging. So the encouraging is at the Department of Commerce with the Secretary Wilbur Ross. So Wilbur Ross has said on a number of occasions that he is committed to spending whatever it takes to produce an accurate census for 2020. When he his first day at the Commerce Department, he had an all-hands meeting that and I think it's somewhere on the web. And he talked about a number of things, including his priorities, and he said, my number one priority is a complete and accurate 2020 census. And then, after that meeting, he actually met with me and Lisa Bloomerman and Kevin Smith, our CAO, to talk about issues related to the 2020 census. So that's encouraging that the interest from the Department of Commerce leadership is there in support of an accurate census. In terms of attitudes about for any population group, including immigrants, we view that as why it's incredibly important to have a really strong program of partnership with local communities, local governments. And we've seen the benefits of that in past censuses. We're not going away from that in this census. We are committed to a partnership program. We have started our partnership program already for 2020. We have hired 42 partnership specialists. So we may, we're going to be negotiating how we build that up, but we are committed to having a full force partnership program for 2020.
Great, thank you. And this is somewhat as a follow-up to Arturo's question as well as perhaps Hassan's, is just with respect to fiscal year 17, is there going to come to a point where, because of funding, you're going to feel a need to shift away from the American Community Survey or suspend the American Community Survey for a month to start to ramp up for the decennial? Along those lines, it's interesting. I don't know if Secretary Ross has made any similar commitment to the American Community Survey as opposed to decennial 2020. And because certainly for us, part of all of this is if we feel like we need to shift resources within our community, just having that dialogue as early as possible. And I recognize the budget is ongoing, et cetera, but it's important to us because, as you know, the communications, the messaging, it takes time to develop, and we don't want to get in a situation where we're really pigeonholed or cabined at the end, trying to scramble to get something together, especially for many of our communities where there are a lot of different languages, a lot of different cultures to deal with. Well, thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. So, with respect to the 17 budget, I may have mentioned this at the last meeting. I can't remember, but we did receive from OMB an anomaly that lets us spend at a higher rate than we could under a normal CR. Now, we could stay on track with developing our systems for the 18 end-to-end test and carrying that to 17 test. Of course, we didn't get any more money, so we had to say this is what will happen if we don't get any more money because, we can only spend so much money. We can't overspend the money we get, or there's all kinds of laws you break and the like. And we've been pretty clear about what actions we're taking to fit within that for 2017. I think the thing we're really waiting to see is what comes out of this process that should occur this week or early next week, and that will definitely shed some clarity on what we're going to do, and then we can really talk about this is what we're going to do in very, very specific terms, and you'll certainly see what we're going to do.
Thank you. Just one quick question. Mr. Director, status of the 2020 Census Advisory Committee. I know that nominations were submitted, we submitted one, versus participation on this committee, just an update as to where those are.
Certainly. So we were very pleased that we got quite a number of nominations. I'm trying to think, is there anybody, was it 70? 59? Yeah, we had 59 nominations, which, and they were good nominations. So what we've done is we've gone through a first pass to try to narrow it down to something that we can focus on, more strongly. But the good thing is we're well on the way to making some selections there and putting that forward.
Do you know what the relationship of that committee will be to this committee as it relates to the work that we're doing going forward for 2020?
Yeah, I think that, well, I shouldn't say think. The intent for the other committee is to be much more of an advocacy committee and help us really reach out on a broad way in support of the 2020 census. That's really what we want to do. We're trying to get all the stakeholder organizations we can so that we can have a really good insights into what their data needs are and tell them what our needs are and what our concerns are so we can work together to promote and carry out a good 2020 census. And this committee will be an ex officio member of that committee. That was similar to what we did with the committee in 2010 and 2000, was that I guess in 2010 and 2000 we had the REACT committees, but they were also an ex officio member of the committee, so there was a definite interchange.
Do you have timing, just when you think you're
It's going to be, there's a lot of things going on right now that we're trying to push through, so it will probably be, so I think the summer, fall of this year.
Oh, okay.
But
Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be here in Suitland. I feel right at home somehow. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to the National Advisory Committee. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things. So I've been on the job a few months now. It's been a very busy few months, as you might imagine, particularly at OMB. There's a lot of transition activities going on. There was an effort to put a budget together quite quickly. And, it's always challenging starting a new job. It's especially challenging starting a new job when you're surrounded by a lot of people who are starting new jobs. But it seems to be settling down a little bit. And as John mentioned, the detailed budget will be coming out in May. So I'm the chief statistician, so I don't work on the budget side, but I do have a little bit of an advantage maybe because earlier in my career, I actually did work at OMB on the budget side. Not with the commerce agencies, but with transportation. And so I have a very good sense of how that budget process works. And part of what I wanted to talk about was a little bit of how I view how I can help the Census Bureau and actually the other statistical agencies as the chief statistician. And of course, the budget is really critical because we want to make sure that the funding is there. They're very, I will just say, there's very tight constraints on the budget. I don't expect that to go away at all. As one might expect, the president has priorities that he wants to fund. Every president has priorities that they want to fund. And so that's where the president's budget is going to have the money. But I think that there's a lot that can be done to really strengthen the federal statistical system, even within those constraints, and in some ways, perhaps because of those constraints. And there's been a lot of executive orders issued in these first couple of months of this administration. And one that I particularly just want to call to your attention. I think it's very, very important, and it could has the opportunity to have a very beneficial effect on the federal statistical system, potentially. And that is the executive order that tells the agencies to look at how they're organized and think about how they could be structured to be more effective or more efficient, or look at kind of things within their agencies and across agencies. And that's one of the things that I learned. I knew, but I really learned in a lot more depth when I went to OMB and started going. My predecessor had been in the job for 24 years, and there was a lot of collected documentation in the office that I inherited. And I looked through it, and it was very interesting because even going back to the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, and the 2000s, there was a lot of studies that were done about how to strengthen the federal statistical system. And I read through a lot of those recommendations. The bad news is, like, none of those things really happened, or very few of them. But the good news is I think there are some opportunities in maybe to move to strengthen the federal statistical system. So that's one area that I would like to really take a good look at and see, because there is a lot that we can do. And that kind of segues maybe into a topic that I know that you're really interested in, which is the review that we're doing right now of the race and ethnicity standards. And so I roll over into that because they are standards, and they're standards for all agencies. And so that's part of that whole coordination, looking across the whole system. How do we want to work together to really strengthen the data that we have that feeds into policy decisions, community decisions, and all those things that we know are really used when we're looking at federal data. And I will just say, also, just as another piece in that puzzle, one of the really other very positive things that happened was when I got to OMB, I was appointed the OMB representative on the Commission for Evidence-Based Policy. So I've been working very, very closely with that commission, which will be coming out with recommendations in September. It's co-chaired by Catherine Abraham, who used to be the commissioner of BLS and is a very well-known academic. She was on the Council of Economic Advisors, and her co-chair is Ron Hoskins from Brookings. And there are a lot of researchers and privacy experts and others. Bob Groves, who many of you know from his tenure at the Census Bureau, is also on that commission. And so I'm very excited. I think we're taking it very seriously. I think we're going to have some very solid recommendations coming out in September. We're putting a lot of work into it, heavy into deliberations. And so that's another little piece of this whole picture that's coming together on federal statistics as a whole. But the race and ethnicity standards are a key piece of that. And particularly because I think one of the drivers for re-examining the standards at this point is the 2020 census. So let me just talk a little bit about where we are in the process. I know many of you have probably been following it very, very closely, and others somewhat closely. But where we are right now is we've had a Federal Register notice out. The comment period closes April 30th. As you might expect, in the last 2 weeks, there has been a very significant uptick in the number of comments coming in. So I can tell you what it is as of today, but I expect even today and tomorrow, it could jump up pretty significantly. But right now we're at 3,000 comments as of the end of the day yesterday. And about, 700 of those comments are unique, which means that, a lot of the comments, I think, are indicative of organized groups who share a point of view, who have sent in comments with very similar wording and sentiments expressed and views. So it's a mix right now. I don't know what will come in the next couple of days, if it'll be more unique comments or more support for the points of view that are being represented in the comments already. I will say that the comments have come in 4 areas, and none of these should be a surprise to you at all. There are comments on the question format. Should it be a combined question or not? There are comments on the MENA category. Should we, and those, express some complexities. Is it a race? Is it an ethnicity? Should it be combined? Should it be separate? Sort of addressing basically those points of view, and then what should be included in the category. There's a lot of views on that as well. There are many comments on sort of the existing groups, disaggregating them further as part of the standard, to have a standard that addresses sort of smaller parts of the existing groups. And then terminology. How should things be referred to and talked about in these standards? So those are kind of, those are basically sort of the 4 areas that were being looked at by the interagency working group that put out the interim report. Those are the areas where they said we would really like some public input to help us formulate our final report. And basically that's kind of where the comments are coming in. So nothing really unexpected. There are no big surprises, but a lot of thoughtful comments that we'll have to go through and consider and work into the process. So where does that put us? Well, our goal is to put out the new standard by the end of the calendar year. And really what's driving that is we want to have a decision on the standards made in time for the timetable for the 2020 census, because the 2020 census is really, kind of the big driver of this in terms of a fixed timetable. For the other agencies, any changes can be worked in over time, but we're really, we don't want to miss or cause census to miss any key deadlines in their schedule for the 2020 census. So that means that the interagency working group will be continuing their analyses that are underway right now, because they are doing further research and discussion, as well as considering the public comments in their work. And we expect that a final report from the interagency working group will be coming out in the fall. And then we'll be, working in that period, kind of in between the fall and the end of the year, to put together what we want to put out from OMB as the standards. So that's kind of the process. That's where we are with the comments. There has been a lot of outreach going on. I will say, one of the things that was a big change when I went to OMB was I went from having somewhere between, 15 to 17,000 employees to having 4. So, and my budget shrunk proportionately, I should say. So a lot of the work on the outreach, I have to thank the Census Bureau. I know the Census Bureau has an interest in that, but many of the activities I really, from OMB, we have to sort of delegate out to the interested agencies to work with their constituencies to handle a lot of the outreach activities. Not that we're not engaged in, not that people haven't come in and talked to us, but for the most part, I just don't have the wherewithal or the budget to hold big workshops or forums or things like that, although we're always happy to participate in those things and help in any way that we can in terms of some of the outreach activities. I think you may have questions, about that. Some of the other things that I have been working on, again, is to reach out to various groups that are both within OMB and not in OMB to try to get a more coordinated, effective look at how we deal with data. And that includes dissemination, making data available to researchers. I chair the Interagency Council on Statistical Policy, which is the heads of the statistical agencies. And we have set 6 priority areas that we want to focus on over the next 6, 12, 18 to 24 months. Some of these include really looking at our methodology for how we talk about the quality, the usability, and other dimensions of combined data as we move forward with combining more survey data with administrative records, on the business side, commercial records, and other data sources that are out there, and want to put it out as statistical data from the federal government. How do we measure that and talk about it? And John Elting, who's here, is chairing the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology, and has really geared up to focus the work of the FCSM over the next 12 months to do a deep dive into several of those areas, disclosure review, quality measures, and other related things. So I'm very excited about that, because I think ultimately the goal for me is to put out a statistical directive from OMB that really talks about these measures of quality, and I think that'll be quite important for users of the data to really understand as it starts to change. It's not just the American Community Survey. It could be the American Community Survey plus 3 other data sources, and you'd want to know what's really in there and what does that mean and how you should be using it. So that's right at the top of the list. Also, I'll just mention a couple of the other things. We're really focused on access to data, making sure that the public has access to data and researchers have access to data. So we're continuing to focus on how we can build up the federal statistical research data centers. I think we reached a really important milestone this week with 31 now open. It's really exciting, and we're working very hard to get more agencies to make their microdata available through the research data centers, and so putting together kind of a broader governance structure and sort of looking at how can we streamline the process for researchers who have really proposals that they want to get approved, so we can make it faster and easier for researchers to access more data through the research data centers. So that's a priority for us that we're working on. And then the third is, how do we get more data out there just to the public in general in understandable ways? And Census has done a lot in that area in terms of putting data on APIs, reaching out to developers, working with communities to develop apps or help them understand how they can access apps. And I think a lot of you have been here for demonstrations of like City SDK, and have heard about some of the hackathons and things like that. And there's lots of other data out there that, the other statistical agencies are really small, many of them, not all of them, but, a lot of them are really small out of the 13 designated agencies, and they don't have the resources, they don't control their own IT, they don't really they have the desire but not the ability to do some of the kinds of exciting things that Census does. So as part of our effort to work together and move forward our priorities, we're trying to take advantage of the know-how of the agencies like Census to get the rest of the data out there in exciting ways and let people play with it and combine it for the public data. So there's a couple other areas that we're looking at, but those were 3 in particular that I thought that you would be interested in. We have a pretty ambitious schedule of doing this, but we're always happy to get input on ideas. So even though I know you're a Census Advisory Committee, but, feel free to advise anybody along these lines, or give your comments to Census, and I know Census will pass them along to me, and we can try to incorporate them into a more broader look. So it's not just census data, but we're looking at all the statistical data. So with that, I'll stop, and if anybody has any questions or thoughts, I'm happy to hear them.
Okay, so I have 2 questions. So I was having dinner with a friend here in DC who works for a policy think tank, and she's Latina and does a lot of work with Latino origin groups, and is very excited about the changes, right? She's excited about the combined format, that it will give them better data for some of the stuff that they want to do. She knows a lot of organizations might want that kind of data as well, in terms of combining the race and origin. So when we were talking about it, I explained to her that she could send that support and comments to OMB, and she asked, well, what would be better? Would it be better for me individually to draft a statement and have different organizations sign on, or for me to send talking points to the different organizations? So when you raise the question of, okay, we have 3,000 comments, about 700 are original, and the rest of them are kind of have those form, those insert things of talking points that someone sent them, right? Would you prefer, in terms of advising people who are, say, asking, how do I give the support, that you get letters, like an individual letter from her that's signed on from individual? Is it volume you want, or is it, you see, I'm asking, do you want her to have organizations do talking points and send you lots of them, or do you want one big letter that she writes, probably going to be better because she's very much following what you all are doing and stuff, or what we're doing here at Census. So one letter from her signed on by a bunch of people. So that's my first question.
Both are valuable because in something that's sort of a repeated set of talking points or a particular short paragraph, when there's a lot of volume, it's helpful in the sense that that this is not just one person, that it's representative of maybe a broader group of people. And so that's helpful to know. On the other hand, if somebody has a lot of in-depth knowledge about what we're doing, sort of more of a scientific approach, or whatever their social science background or something like that, it is very helpful to hear comments and things that maybe people haven't thought of. So both are equally valuable, actually.
Okay, great. My second question would be more in terms of people framing their comments. The audience is OMB. So I guess you kind of just answered this. So is a more detailed sort of commentary about specific uses, what would be helpful for them with the data, or should the comments be more kind of almost like an op-ed style where it's a lot more focused towards a broad audience, like how people reviewing this are OMB who have specialized knowledge, and so detail-oriented for their comments would be preferred?
If they are, the comments are really structured around the questions that the Interagency Working Group has asked. The Interagency Working Group is doing research, and so they have said these are the areas, in their first notice they said these are the areas we think we want to look at, but we'd like to get comments to see if we're hitting the mark here, if we missed something that we should be looking at that we're not looking at. So the second one was kind of, well, here's where we are so far. Here's where we think there's additional work to do. Again, we want to get input. So I think the best thing to do is to structure it to the interim report of the Interagency Working Group and those questions, because that's specifically where we were looking for input, if you're going to get detailed.
Desi, did you have a question?
Are you going to go to the phones, or I can ask mine quickly?
Did we want to go to the phones, Tara? Yes. Operator, could you bring James in?
you are on the phone, please press star then 0.
Go ahead, James.
His line is not open.
James, are you there? We're ready for your question.
Yes, I am. I am so sorry. I actually, I had a question earlier, just to kind of follow up on a point that our school had raised, and I think this is somewhat tied to what Nancy was speaking. Much of what, the OMB federal register notice is asking about is concentrated on budgetary constraints. And so one of the issues and concerns that we have is that, because we're talking about very small populations, that oftentimes it's going to be necessary to have additional census to be able to reach those harder to reach populations in very small villages and very small reservations. And I did want to let Nancy know, we're actually going to go into a little bit more detail. We are planning on submitting comments, before the April 30th deadline. But just in terms of one of our concerns is that to make sure that in terms of what the Bureau is doing going forward, that we think it's very important as part of the end-to-end test that there is a chance to try to integrate the field test on the tribal land and be able to address some of the challenges that we're going to see in terms of lack of mailing addresses, lack of street addresses, and just some of the other issues that we face in trying to identify specifically where the native respondents are.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I've noted them.
Great, thank you, James. Desi?
Thanks, Nancy. I had a question. You keep mentioning this interagency working group. Is that the member list, is that public, or is that, where can we find that information? That would be great.
Yeah, I believe that the membership of the interagency working group certainly is public, and it should be if it's not in the Federal Register notice, it should be in the materials that are alongside the Federal Register notice. The Federal Register notice itself is accessible through either the Federal Register, it's on reg.gov. But if it's not, it's definitely public information. So if you can't find it, let me know and I can make that available. But I think it should be on the website.
So we're going to go Ann, Hassan, Turo, and Megan.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for coming back to meet with us again, and congratulations. The federal statistical system is very lucky to have you. I have two questions. The first one has to do with basically the race ethnicity question that the Census Bureau has identified as optimal coming out of the 2015 National Content Test. So the combined question with the MENA category and so forth. So my first question is simply, what does OMB have to do in order for the Census Bureau to be able to field that question? does MENA have to be designated a minimum reporting category by OMB? So I'd just like to know what needs to happen on your end for that to go through. And then my second question has to do whether OMB has to explicitly designate the MENA category as a racial category or as an ethnic category. If it would be used on a combined format question where, the individual groups are not, explicitly or clearly either racial or ethnic groups. So I wanted to understand that a bit better.
Those are really excellent questions and very important. Thank you for asking them. So there are a lot of possible outcomes with the standards. One point that's very, very important to make is that these are minimum standards. They're not maximum standards. So if, for example, Census can break out the MENA category, whether OMB makes any changes in the standards or not. What the implication is in the end, if you want to sum up to the minimum standards, then MENA would continue to be rolled up into the white category, which it currently is, unless somebody is, marking a different, another race or however that is rolled up. Where it gets, like in the census, you have everybody in there, so you don't have the same issue with very small populations or small sample sizes or things like that. So one of the things that OMB has to consider is minimum, because minimum is minimum. It means it's required for everything for all purposes, and it rolls out also to states. That's one of the issues that we're looking at across all of the agencies. That's a big topic for the interagency working group is, what makes sense for every information collection that the federal government is doing, particularly when it comes to sample surveys. And particularly those agencies that depend very heavily on states. And, what can you require states to do at the federal level? And how long does it really take for all 50 states to make changes to the way that they're collecting data now, because it's taken some of them almost 20 years just to meet the current standards. So these are all very important issues between what's a minimum standard and what are you allowed to do under the standards, which right now, there really isn't any prohibition on breaking out into as disaggregated data as you think you can collect and still have quality data. So that is a really important point to make in terms of what can the Census Bureau do now, even if OMB did nothing. And Census can certainly break out the MENA category without a change in the standard. That is allowed under the existing standard. So this question of, the combined question, I think, is actually the one that's just a little bit stickier, and it gets complicated by the fact that the census is required to have some other race, and other agencies are not required to have some other race as a box there. So part of the research that's being done by the interagency working group is to sort of look at how do you bridge between census data and other surveys. And that bridging is actually done right now because the other surveys don't ask some other race in many instances, nor do states collect some other race. So we already have methodologies in place where we're taking census data and making it available to the other agencies that are using it and figuring out how do we connect up the data that they're collecting with the data that was collected in the census. And that research is underway, and that will play, I think, a big role in determining, we have to be satisfied that we have quality data when we do that. And a combined question has a big influence on what happens to that category of some other race and how many people are checking that box. So we have an existing methodology to deal with it. And part of the question is, are we satisfied that if there's a combined question that we still have a methodology that everybody who's using that data feels is going to work in a combined format. So then, in between there is this question of MENA, and is it a race or an ethnicity? If it's a combined question, you don't have to define that necessarily, right? It's vague. I mean, there's a lot of different views out there on what's a race and what's an ethnicity, as you know, and it's a gray area in many instances. So part of what we have to do is parse through all of that and figure out, can Census ask the combined question with the MENA category, what would have to change in the standard, which is exactly what you said. And I think if the standard is not an either or thing, all right? So, for example, the standard could say, well, if you have a census with, or a large enough sample, and we're satisfied that, we can bridge this data to much smaller surveys and data collections and still come up with rational descriptions of race and ethnicity in those surveys and from the census, maybe you can do it either way. Maybe the standard allows both. There's no, I mean, that's the nice thing about the standard, is that OMB can put out a standard that isn't, there's no like predetermined boundary for a standard. It's what makes sense in what is going to result in quality data. So it's possible we could end up with a standard that says in something like that's as big as the census or the American Community Survey, you're allowed to use a combined question, but you're not required in every single data collection across the federal government to make it a combined question. That would be a possible outcome. Does that answer the question?
Hassan?
First, Nancy, it's good to have you back, and congratulations. And I know OMB got the best person for this position. And what a wonderful way to bridge between Census and OMB. And thank you for the questions. I actually was gonna ask these questions, and thank you for the explanation. Let me ask you then, so after this period of comments from your side, OMB, where we go next? What's the timetable?
When you say where do we go next, you mean like after the standard comes out in December, or you mean how do we get to December?
How do we get to December?
Okay, so the comment period will end. I think it's going to take us a while to kind of really thoughtfully go through that many comments. The interagency working group has been working very, very hard to try to address some of these issues, like how do we bridge data if everybody's not using a combined question? What does that mean? Could we do something like that? All of the questions that they've raised in terms of kind of sorting through the MENA category and what might be included in that, and would it be a race or an ethnicity, and what would happen combined. All those are things that the interagency working group is really working very, very hard on, and saying, do we have enough research? Do we need to do any more testing, given that we want to get a final report out by fall? So I think the period between now and September is going to be very, very busy for the interagency working group. And we've also been looking at, are there ways that, without doing field tests, because there isn't money or time to do big field tests right now on this, to supplement what the NCT has done and what's already been done. But there's been some very interesting research that we've been able to do through data linkage work, looking at responses on different surveys. And that's sort of can be done faster and less expensively. And so we've been saying, what is the body of knowledge we have to accumulate for all of the agencies that are participating in this research to really feel like we are going to have a standard that assures the quality of the data and assures that it's going to be consistent in the ways that we're collecting and using it. So that's a lot to do between, we're almost in May, so we've got May, June, July, August, and the report has to be written, the research done. There's not, there has to be some consensus in the interagency working group as well. So the next 4 months are going to be quite busy. And then OMB will take the final report and take all of these things into consideration and figure out what we want to put out there as a standard, or if we're changing the standard at all. So that, and then we have to write out what we're going to do based on considering, the public comments, all the research, the interagency working group, final report. We don't have to follow the recommendations of the interagency working group. But if we're not going to follow the recommendations, we have to explain why pretty thoroughly. So, and then we'll put out our standards and we'll publish them.
I mean, do you also take into consideration the comments requested by Census previously regarding these issues?
Yeah, I mean, and there's a pretty, I think there's a pretty healthy record of the first comment period and other things that are on the record that will, that feed into the decision-making process. Yeah.
Great, so we're just going to take two more because we're getting a little off schedule. We have Arturo and Megan.
Thank you, Didas. Good to see you, Nancy. I think you may have answered this question, but I'm not sure. There was no additional comment period, right, after this comment period ends. So then it's all just the working group and then OMB making its final reports. And what I wasn't clear on is the OMB report or decision may or may not, you still don't know, prohibit or allow the Census Bureau from using a combined question. Right, it's up in the air. And if you don't change the standards, would that allow a combined question?
I think at this point, no, because the standard is for a separate question. But, I mean, the only way around that would be to give Census like a waiver to the standard, which is definitely not a preferred way of doing this. But, I think it's, yeah, I mean, the standard as it stands right now doesn't really, as it has been interpreted by OMB, actually before I even got there, was that it didn't really, the standard didn't allow for that without waiving the standard in some way.
Nancy, congratulations. I'm a giant OMB fan. I read the Federal Register every day, so very excited for you to be over there. Also outing myself as a nerd. This is just a little bit of a turn. I know you mostly came prepared to talk about the interagency working group on the race ethnicity standards, so totally fine if you say, let me get back to you on this. But I know that OMB also convened a federal interagency working group on improving measurement of sexual orientation, gender identity in federal surveys. That's a mouthful. And in that report, you said sort of early on in the third iteration of that report, you said early on in the introduction that there was a need for more representative and better quality data around sexual orientation and gender identity. I would just wonder if you know anything about how OMB is moving forward to answer the research questions posed in those reports and ensure that federal agencies are collecting more representative and better quality data.
So it isn't something that I have done a deep dive in since I've been there. But, what I think is that right now, as various surveys or information collections come into OMB for clearance, it's really the agencies that are driving the need. It's not OMB per se in an overall way saying, hey, this is something that is, standardized across the entire federal government at this point. From, it really is the agencies saying, this is, these are data that we need, that we want to collect information on. And it's varied. I mean, there have been some information collections where the agencies have come back and said, we can't get quality data because of, the size of the population. There just isn't enough there to be able to publish anything meaningful. I think we saw that in some pilot projects. But right now, I think we're really, I can take a look, as you say, and come back and say, well, where are we really going with the interagency working group and some of the research questions that they're looking at. But it's a live topic. I mean, it's and agencies are really working through what they need for their various programs and seniors, health, I mean, all kinds of issues, veterans. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, and would love to continue that conversation with you. I know you're new to the role too, so don't mean to put you on the spot, but thanks so much for that.
All right, thank you very much, Nancy. So now we'd like to welcome Deb Stemkowski, who's going to present an update on the 2020 census, along with a demonstration from Alexa Jones-Putoff.
Thanks, Nancy, and good morning, everybody. Lisa sends her regrets, but she should be joining us probably right after lunch. So you can save up hard questions to make sure keep her on her toes. But nonetheless, I'm really pleased to be here with you all this morning. There you go. So before I get into the presentations, I wanted to provide additional updates on our decennial leadership team. Of course, thank John for sharing our late-breaking news as we welcome Al to the directorate, so that vacant box there will have a name on it next time you see it. That's exciting. But since November, we've also had a number of other leadership changes which have helped us build out our decennial team. Louis Cano is now the chief of our decennial contracts and execution office. I don't think Louis is here, but he joined us back in January from the Weather Service and is providing lots of help, guidance, and leadership, and we're happy to have him on board. Another name that I think is familiar to many of you, and he should be joining us as well later this afternoon, is Burton Reist. We welcome him back from the Department of Commerce, and he is chief of our decennial communications and stakeholder relations area. Erica Becker Medina is the chief of our decennial communications coordination office. She joins us from the Economic Directorate, and then Emily Crooks joins us as the chief of our decennial budget office. So that builds out that structure right there. Since I have the mic, I was going to share something just a little bit more selfish as I looked at the agenda for later today. Many of you have grown to know Tasha Boone over lots of years of expertise, and so Tasha actually took on a new role in January as my deputy. So I'm very happy about that, thrilled to have her as part of Decennial Census Management Division. And that's why you see a name that maybe you're not as familiar with, but you'll become very familiar with over our Integrated Partnership and Communications campaign, and that's Maria Malagon, who will be joining us during the working lunch. So I'll try not to repeat a lot of what we've already had some good dialogue on in terms of the budget. So I think we all know, right? We're still operating under the continuing resolution, which will hopefully not be our case within the next few days or next week. The 2020 census did receive an anomaly provision in that continuing resolution. And what does that mean? That allows us to spend a little bit faster rate than during a regular continuing resolution where you'll hear people are flatlined at a previous year's spending rate. It's important to note, though, that this provision doesn't provide any additional funding, and it didn't provide us any assurances of future funding, but it just released that one constraint, but we still had to be very careful minding our budget. We're utilizing this provision, and actually have been. I realize we've been giving a very similar budget update now 7 months into the fiscal year, but we have used that provision to continue prioritizing our system readiness for the 2018 end-to-end test. But as even some of you all have pointed out, we did have to replan or pause some activities during this period. In our January PMR, Lisa announced some changes that we had to make given our budget situation. For example, we've replanned our address canvassing strategy for the census, where we paused our active block resolution, and we also paused our MAF coverage study. So that translates to more listers being sent to the field. We did, as we've discussed here already, had to slow our efforts on advertising and partnership. We made a decision to delay the opening of our regional census centers. We had to replan our census coverage measurement program. And 2 ways we're doing that. We had to de-scope those operations from our end-to-end tests. So originally they were part of that. We've taken them out of scope. And then we're also looking at our solutioning around how we deliver that program. And as well, we had to not put as much effort as we'd like on our evaluations and experiments program. And lastly, on 2020, we've had to significantly reduce our program management and our test management support. So I think these were necessary changes, although challenging, but we have implemented them and done our best to keep 2020 on schedule, which was our goal. I thought I would just cut in a little bit here just on the ACS from what I know. In terms of decisions that we made back as well in January, they did cut back on their CADI, so their phone operation, shifting more to CAPI. And as well, they've also cut a year of their general performance reviews, as well as some of their CAPI refresher training. So that allowed them to also stay on budget. Again, very tough decisions that the ACS had to make there. So hopefully there'll be some finality on the 17 budget in the next, I don't think it'll be tomorrow, but if it's not, then it'll be within the next week or so for there. So where are we in 2017? Well, we know that just actually, it wasn't just a week ago, it was quite some time ago in Census World on April 1, 2017. That put us 3 years from Census Day in 2020. So what are we doing? First and foremost, our emphasis is not only on the 2020 preparations, but we are honing in very quickly on the beginning of our end-to-end test in August with address canvassing. And that is why we had to prioritize in order to get those systems ready to get the beginning of the end, or the first end in that end-to-end, ready to roll in production. As you can imagine, designing a test of every system and every operation we plan to use, getting those right IT solutions in place, as well as the processes, takes a significant amount of resources. Certainly, we're going to segue in just a couple of slides over to the other activity we have going on right now, our 2017 census test that Alexa will discuss. But that is all bookended in between preparing for 2020 overall operations, as well as our 2018 census test. So when Lisa gave me the deck, when she realized she would need to step out to go to the department, I had to chuckle because it says the first thing on this slide is, "This is one of my favorite slides." And I thought, I do like this slide because it compacts everything together there very tightly around what we need to do. Firmly, of course, now we're moving into the implementation phase, so we're in the blue. Awarding major contracts, making decisions, testing our operations. And even though we'll go over a couple of these things that are up there in the next few slides, I thought I'd call out 2 things. First, I think what this slide always reminds me of, and I don't see it on there, is I'd like to thank Ditas for the commercial for Luca and the pressing forward there, because we've started the 2020 census with that. So thank you for opening your opening remarks with that. What an unexpected and great surprise. So what else do we have up there? On there, we've moved along this past fall. We completed our address canvassing test, which was in 2 counties, Buncombe, North Carolina, as well as the city of St. Louis. Those results will be coming out later this spring into the summer. And of course, we've done our due diligence with lessons learned. The themes there, just at a high level, aren't much different than we would have expected, with some focus on improving training, such as more in-field exercises. Learned a little bit more about how we're assigning our block assignments, and we can take those lessons learned and put them back into play for our address canvassing for the 2018 test. The other part of this, the operational readiness, I think right before you all were here, we released our next iteration of the operational plan back in October, which seems quite a long time ago, and that is something we'll do annually. So you'll see that again next October. In terms of contracts, we certainly had a busy summer in 2016. Starting at the bottom of the slide there, we awarded our Census Questionnaire Assistance contract, which serves 2 functions. The first is to provide assistance to respondents by essentially answering their questions and helping them complete their response. And then it also provides them an opportunity to respond via the telephone. And this is something that was part of our 2017 test. We awarded that contract in July to General Dynamics Information Technology, and went from that award July 11th to full-blown production in about 6-7 months. So that was a great achievement. Also, the integrated communications contract, which I know you guys are familiar with, that supports our integrated communications program, increasing awareness and participation in the census, and that was awarded August 24th. And of course, Maria will talk about that a little bit more when she joins us. Our technical integration contract is a vehicle that we will use to support all the design and architecture, engineering, and integration activities for the 2020 system of systems. It includes things like infrastructure planning and design, data center capability, our data capture centers, support in our field offices. So it's a pretty robust contract that includes even through our disaster recovery solutions. That's a tongue twister for 2020. And that contract was also awarded last summer to the T-Rex Corporation. Moving along to something that we did in the November timeframe, we awarded our what's called Schedule A Human Resources Payroll System. We call that C-Sharps. That will help us introduce efficiencies into all the human resources processing by automating our recruiting, hiring, onboarding, and separation, and streamlining those activities with payroll capabilities related to our temporary staff. And I think you're all aware we have quite a lot of temporary staff when we're in full-blown production. Moving on to the last couple of contracts there, back to the top of the slide. So our Device as a Service contract, which we plan to award later this spring. Oops, sorry. Thanks, Enrique. He's a good neighbor. I should put the clicker down. We have a couple of smaller contracts that we used for the devices to support 16, our previous tests, and here we wanted to learn more about the requirements as we plan to award the larger contract for the 2020 census. Jeff Peja of our staff does a fabulous job managing this. And then we also have a couple of other contracts that we're hoping to award, and the plan is to award by the end of this fiscal year, both to support our fingerprinting and badging operation, as well as our field IT deployment. So as you can see, where the list of contracts to be awarded is getting smaller, and the list of contracts that have been awarded is growing larger. So John talked about this a bunch in his opening remarks, and we had a good dialogue here. This is a key legislative milestone for the census, so that's why we like to call it out here. And I think we talked about it a bunch. So with that, I'd like to move, next is the update that Alexa is going to do on the 2017 census test. And I think, are we going to move the computer before you finish these slides or after? This is always a nervous thing when you're going to have 40 people watch you try to transition technology and get a demo going. But before I let Alexa talk, I think what I'm most proud about the 2017 test is we integrated what I call the self-response engine around my parts of the world in the operations. So we provided our internet self-response, our questionnaire assistance there. Oops, I'm not touching that. Somebody took over. I'll just put it down. Anyway, so our self-response engine is what Alexa will start to talk about. But as I said, it's our internet, it's our telephone, of course it's our tried and true paper operations, it's our real-time non-ID processing, and this is all running in a cloud environment. So from my perspective, that puts a nice chunk of the pipeline in place, and Alexa's going to share a bunch more information about that now.
All right, I will jump right in while I get the computer. So thanks. Now your clicker is working?
Now it's working.
We're good.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Deb. So the 2017 census test has been underway for about a month, and I'm really excited to be able to talk with you about it today. This test is a nationwide self-response test consisting of 80,000 housing units across the United States with an April 1st, 2017 census day. Scoot myself over, you can keep on rolling. All right. So the 2017 census test, as Deb mentioned, is allowing us to test key new systems and the integration of operations and systems for self-response, and to test the feasibility of, oops, I'm not quite there yet. Can we grab the slides again? There we go. That's what I was expecting to see. All right. So let's see. So we're testing key new systems, integration of operations and systems, as Deb mentioned, for self-response, and also testing the feasibility of collecting tribal enrollment information. And for this test, households are able to participate, as Deb mentioned, online, by phone, and by mail through paper questionnaires. Our national sample of 80,000 housing units are in mailable areas all across the United States. And to limit respondent burden, we have, as we have in previous tests, removed housing units that have participated in prior census tests or the American Community Survey. And the sample in this case was stratified with an oversample for housing units in Alaska, areas with relatively higher populations of American Indians and Alaska Natives, and areas with lower propensity to respond online. In addition to the self-response focus of the test, there's a re-interview portion that is conducted over the phone. The tribal enrollment re-interview is for a sample of housing units that responded to the self-response portion of the test. And there, the focus is on households that are geographically located in Alaska, as well as households that contain people who indicate they are enrolled in a tribe or are a shareholder, or racially identified as American Indian Alaska Native, and those who responded without a census ID. So the 80,000 housing units I mentioned earlier are assigned to one of two panels, which we've dubbed Internet First and Internet Choice. In the first mailing, the Internet First panel received a letter inviting them to participate by responding online. That letter also contained information about how to contact our census questionnaire assistance call center if they needed to. The Internet Choice panel received a paper questionnaire in addition to the invitation letter and CQA information. Because of the oversampling I described, the breakdown of the sampled households between Internet First and Internet Choice is a bit more heavily skewed towards choice than some prior census tests. Roughly 60% of the sample is in the Internet First panel, and about 40% is in the Internet Choice panel. Mail materials for this test were available in English and bilingual English-Spanish versions,
and about 87% of the addresses in sample were slated to receive English-only materials, while bilingual English-Spanish materials went to about 13% of the addresses in sample. The first mailing of the 2017 census tests occurred on March 20th, and as mentioned, that had different materials for both the Internet First and the Internet Choice panels. 3 days after the initial invitation, the reminder was sent to all households, encouraging respondents to complete the questionnaire. Everyone got that regardless as to whether or not they had already replied. It was right after the initial mailing, that first 3 days. After that second contact, though, we start peeling out people who have already responded to the census test. So after that one, households that had not yet responded received up to 3 more reminders, with the fourth mailing containing a paper questionnaire for both panels. So by the fourth mailing, no matter which panel you were in, you had a paper questionnaire in your hand and you were able to respond using it if you'd like. And the last mailing are It's Not Too Late postcard, which actually does result in a bump in responses, which is great. That was mailed on April 20th. So we are now complete for mailing for the 2017 census test. And here I have a couple of bits of data from, this is last Wednesday, April 19th is the age of this data, but it's all essentially what's going on in the test. We've seen most of our volume come in as of that point. So as of last Wednesday, we had just shy of 30% of the sample households who had responded to the 2017 census test. About 17,000 responses had been submitted via the internet, and that included more than 2,000 responses that came from households in the Internet Choice panel, those who had an opportunity to respond by paper from the get-go if they so desired. Jumping to the paper questionnaire responses in the mail column toward the end of the table, as of last Wednesday, we had a little more than 5,500 paper responses from the Internet Choice panel. As of the date of the slide, we didn't have any mail responses that had already flowed through into the Internet Choice panel, the Internet Choice panel, which is why you see zeros there. But I pulled the numbers this morning, and as of this morning, we have additional material coming in. We have about 11,000 total paper responses that are at some stage of the system getting paper data captured, and about half of those have come in since this was out, and new information was coming in then from people who got their questionnaire in the Internet First panel at that fourth mailing. And let's see, I don't think I have much else that I need to say about this one, other than for the census questionnaire assistance line, we have the telephone calls up there as about a little under 5,000. As of right now, our inbound calls were 5,500 this morning, and customer service handled, representative handled, were about 3,000. And of those, about 1,400 had turned into actual responses over the phone. This is something that's new for this census test, well, the census in general, is that we're now allowing people to respond by phone. So we're watching those very carefully, particularly as this was our first implementation of the contracted census questionnaire assistance solution. It seems to be going very well. All right, so now I'm on the demonstration portion. And we're going to pull up the Internet Self-Response instrument and fly through it live. So this is the actual instrument that's up right now for the 2017 census test. See if I can get this a little bit more in front of me. This is the first page you come to when you enter the URL that we send you on the paper invitation in the mail. Oh, my mouse is not hooked in. Let's use this. And you click the big blue button that says Start Questionnaire. You verify that you are indeed a human. This is done by a reCAPTCHA. The storefronts always get me. Is that a store? I don't know. I'm going to say yes. Oh boy, here we go. It's not liking me this time. I don't know. I'm going to call that a store. It doesn't care so much that you're getting the answers right as it is watching for how you're moving the mouse around. So luckily, even if I bomb a couple, is this a storefront questions, I can still get in. Here we go. Street signs I like better. Those are easier. Tail of that one there. Okay, clearly it does not believe that I'm a human. I promise you, I am. Give it a second to think about that. There we go. All right. I am indeed a human. Success. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So here we are, landing page for the 2017 census test. So what we have here is the place where we're asking you to enter your user ID. And over on this side, you see the information about where to find your ID, and this is essentially pulled from those materials. So it looks exactly like the piece of paper that you hopefully have in front of you, where you can grab your user ID either from this box or in a place next to a barcode and enter it in the boxes here. Since I do not have a user ID to use live in the test right now, I'm going to go the non-ID route, which it says, it's a little hard to read, but it says if you do not have a user ID, click here. So you get into there. And to be able to save and log out in this version of the test, you have to provide a username. So, oops, let me not. And my username is available, NAC Demo 123. Excellent. So we'll submit that, and then we're heading into the core of the survey. So the first thing we give you is a PIN. If you need to write down this PIN, if you want to get out and back in 2017, you need to have this PIN to get back in. That's how I make sure that no one else is dipping into your existing responses, one of the many ways. And the first question is, where did you live on April 1st? And this is dynamically worded such that this prior to April 1st will say, where will you live on April 1st? And then it switches over to, do you live on April 1st? On April 1st, and then did you live once you're past April 1st? And I grabbed the address of my local barbecue joint. I like to use these types of things for these. So nothing like having a bunch of people watch you type. Ooh, I hate that. All right, I know. So let's see if it's going to recognize my address. Yes, great. So it goes through the address standardization process where it essentially looks against our own records to see if we think that that's a valid address, and we do, so we'll move right on. All right, so here we have some additional functionality built in that wasn't in the past years. Here you can put numbers. If you try to type letters in the boxes, we kick it back out, and we're only allowing you to put numbers in here. And I'm going to skip those other two pieces. So this is the household roster home screen. You have household questions that you're going to go ahead and jump right into, including yourself, how many people were living and staying, and then it feeds you back your address on April 1st, 2017. And throughout, there are help texts available in various places, but we'll just go quickly through this. So I'm going to say 2. We already have person 1, last name up there. See, I can't type in front of people. And here on this screen, you have the option to delete or add additional people. So even if you said 2 on the prior screen, then you remember there's a kid, you think you should add them, you can add them right there. It'll pop open another box. You have an opportunity to add them. There are a couple of different spots throughout the survey where you can do that to make sure that we're grabbing everyone that's actually in the household. All right, here's confirmation to make sure that you didn't miss anyone. We feed you back the people you've already told us about. I'm going to say there are no additional people. All right, this is the tenure question. So let's say it was rented. It gives you an option to say who's renting it. I'll say both of the people. And now you have a roster built for your household. And so you can start on any person. Typically, people will start on the first person. That's probably the desired path to take. So we'll head in. There again, you can see you can add another person even on that screen if you needed to. And then we have our standard set of demographic questions. grab some random day. Does automatic calculation of the age. And then you get to the race and ethnicity question. This one was one that we struggled with a little bit about how to fit it all on the screen, because there's a lot of information we want people to be able to see. We don't want it too crunched such that if you're on a tablet, it's hard to hit the actual button. But we do want to have as much available on the screen so people can see essentially what all of their options are all in one place. So this side-by-side stack is where we ended up, where we have the actual race and ethnicity group over here, and then we have the examples over to the side. We also have help available. Oh, let me go back real quick and actually select one. So once you have, let's say, a couple of boxes selected, if you went into help, one of the problems we were having in prior census tests is the help screen was super long. People were scrolling forever and maybe not seeing their particular text. So we have it now where it just opens up the particular categories that you did already select. If you hadn't selected any yet, you can open all, and even here, you can open all of them to see what the particular help text or definitions are for those, and you can collapse and expand them all to see all the details. We also have new functionality where we have closing options at the top and at the bottom of the screen. That was something that was a bit of a pain on mobile last time around. And then once you get past that screen where you've identified race and ethnicity, then you get the detailed information page where you can click boxes. You can also add text here, and this will dynamically resize. You can say as much as you'd like about what your ethnicities are. And here, if you don't enter any information, this is called a soft edit, this blue box. It is one that pops up if we really would like you to answer, but we're not going to force you to answer. If we were going to force you to answer at any point, it would be in red, but this one is in blue. And you can, I'll show you, proceed without actually answering the question if you want to. All right, so then we get into our tribal enrollment questions. And if you say yes, it expands to give you place to enter your tribes. This is something that we heard a lot in our tribal consultations recently, is that the boxes felt too small for them. So we, again, have this where you can write as much as you need. It will fit any tribe's official names that we have in our database would be able to be typed in that. We have plenty of characters there for people. And then once you've completed person one, you get back to the roster page, and you can complete the next person. So you have a little green checkbox saying you're done with person one. Here, let's start person two. And the first question you get when you get to person two or any later person is the relationship question. This is another one of those. It's a little bit long, but hopefully sized where people can pick the appropriate one. And I can't even remember how old I said that person was. I may create an interesting dynamic here. Hey, look at that. All right, 93. We're all 93. All right, then you get back to...
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Because I remember the issue of people marking the wrong sex for their partners and talking about that basically, that just people are used to putting, male for themselves. And so they just put male for the next person, just not thinking. Will it, if you said you were in an opposite sex, like marriage, and then you put the wrong gender for your partner, will it bump it back and say, or is there anything that, you see what I'm saying? If you were to put female there, but you told them you were an opposite sex marriage, what will it do?
It sends you through a series of edits to say, okay, this person is recorded as female, is that correct? And then you'd have a chance to fix it if it wasn't correct. Or if you want to, stick with that, then it asks you about person one. And then it says, okay, from what you've told us, that's not the case, so fix it now. And then we'll...
That's great. I remember that was an issue, and I wanted to know if you'd found some ways to fix it. That looks good.
So we definitely walk you back through everything if you give us information that we perceive to be inconsistent. And you can proceed with the inconsistency, but you have to kind of get through all of that to force it to say, yeah, I know I'm answering this inconsistently, I'd like to keep going. So let me move kind of quickly through person 2 so we can get towards the end.
Megan, did you have a question as we're?
Oh, I suppose before I get too far away from everything, I should say up in the top is where you have your options to switch between English and Spanish. So you just click the box and it translates everything on the page, and it'll hold as you go forward until you click it to flip it back to English if you'd like. And once we have additional languages built, they'll all be available up in that same area where you can click through and pick whichever language you'd like. Let's see, Jenny, do you want to take that? All right.
Yeah, John, we're going to have a presentation after the break.
Yeah, so roughly I would say about 10, and Jenny will talk more about that later, I think. Okay, so just for expediency, I'm going to go ahead and say no for these, get us through to the end. All right, so once you have everything in, you get a green box up at the top that allows you to complete your census questionnaire up there, or again at the bottom if you're used to kind of scrolling down and looking for something at the bottom. Once you click it, we double check to make sure that you haven't included someone who usually lives or stays somewhere else. If you say, no, we're both in this household, then you move forward. You get one last chance to go back and change any of your answers. Speak now. And if you want to submit, you just say yes. It'll pop up. It gives you, at this moment, it gives you a receipt that has the time and date that you completed. There's an option to generate a PDF, which is essentially the same thing. But this is something that we're thinking in the future could potentially be something that respondent saves, and then if a NERF enumerator comes to the door, they have something to show to the enumerator, say, look, I've done it. Here's my receipt saying that I'm complete. And that's it.
Great, I think we have a question from Teku and then Hassan.
Thank you. I was just curious to see what the help language says on the MENA category and also on other race, and I'm wondering if that content will be guided by the new standards that OMB puts out in December.
So yes, everything will be guided by new standards, should they come, and the language that is in there right now, since I have exited the survey, I can't get back to it very easily without starting a whole new case, but we certainly can provide that to you if you'd like. I think, is that, Jenny, we can send them all the help text, so you can see everything.
So I'm curious, how many tries before the computer kick you out when you identifying if you are a robot or not? How many times that it gives you a chance to prove you're not a robot?
That's a good question. It's an external third-party piece that we're using there. It's Google's reCAPTCHA engine. Jason, do you happen to know the answer?
It cycles through till you get it right, or you keep cycling through.
Okay, you can click little boxes to your heart's content, apparently, until it finally decides you're a human.
Are we gonna also test how much of discouragement this aspect, this part of participating in it?
So reCAPTCHA in general does capture some paradata. I don't think that we've looked at it at this point, although Jason, jump up here if you have any corrections or anything I'm saying. But I think that generally, this is, of all the times I've gone into the instrument, the worst I've personally ever encountered. Typically, and you see these on a lot of different websites, so you probably have encountered these before. It's all the same, so anytime you come to one of these reCAPTCHA things, it's the same type of thing, where you're picking a few boxes and then moving forward. Usually, at least when I've done them, either on our census test page or in other environments, it typically is a page or two of the pictures where you're picking signs or storefronts or whatnot, and then it moves you along.
So I have Desi, Miley, and then Arturo.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first is about the re-interview process. So you said 15,000 households or units are re-interviewed. Can you explain, are those only people with regard to the tribal enrollment who actually answered that tribal enrollment question, or how that re-interview process works for that? And then just secondly, you said you can put as much as you want in those boxes, but how many are actually tabulated? Thanks.
So everything would be captured in terms of what's tabulated downstream. I would need to get some help from my friends at the back. In terms of the re-interview, we're also re-interviewing people who went in through the non-ID path, so it's not just people who indicated that they were a shareholder or participant in a tribe. So we have the pool of folks available or who we sampled from for the re-interview includes people who did not indicate that they were American Indian, did not indicate that they were enrolled in a tribe. Does that answer your question?
So if you were indicated you were American Indian, but you did not answer the enrollment question, are you re-interviewed?
Not all of them, but I believe some of them are. There we go, Sarah, excellent. I didn't see you sitting there. Let me grab our resident expert on this.
Hi, Sarah Kanya, Decennial Statistical Studies Division. So each week as the self-response data is coming in, we're looking at it. And so right now we're sending with certainty, with no sample, every household that is geographically located in Alaska, regardless of their tribal enrollment response or their racial identification. We're sending every house not in Alaska that racially identifies as American Indian, Alaska Native to the re-interview, as well as any household that indicates that they are enrolled in a tribe or is a shareholder. Then, once we've sent those with certainty, then we're selecting a sample from other households that may or may not have filled out that tribal enrollment question.
Okay, so to clarify, every household not in Alaska who indicated they were American Indian or Alaska Native is getting a follow-up?
Yes.
Okay.
With at least one person who indicated they were American Indian or Alaska
Regardless of their tribal, how they answered tribal
Correct.
enrollment? Okay, thank you. And then in terms of tabulation, I mean, I think this is important for a lot of us. You can write as much as you want in there, but what's done with that?
So the write-in data will be coded based on a code list that we have.
Hi. Hi, I thought I would join Sarah in this conversation. Hyun Shin, Chief of the Racial Statistics Branch and Population Division. Like as Sarah said, that in the NCT, if you remember, we were trying to test to see how many write-ins we were getting to capture the wide breadth of all of the races and ethnicity that people provide. In the NCT, we did up to 10. Based on the data from the NCT, we've actually narrowed it down to capturing up to 6. So while the space will allow up to 200 characters, I do believe, the total number of tabulations at the end will be up to 6 codes per write-in line.
Melly. Aloha. That says mine, it fell off the table. I'm Maile Tawali'i, and I just have, I'm kind of building off of Desi's questions because I think I'm not really understanding it either. I just double checking to make sure that the intention of reconnecting with people, re-interviewing them, is to help understand those who are going to get missed because they don't consider themselves enrolled or have been disenrolled, but are still American Indian, Alaska Native. And so I know Alaska is a prominent area that may happen, but other areas where urban Indians have left tribal areas, and just making sure that there is, that people still know that they can identify as American Indian despite the question of enrollment being asked. And if you folks are focusing on that instead of just sort of, putting it out there in that sense. And then at other question of, so I noticed that person number 2 indicated that they were white, but was asked, they were asked tribal enrollment regardless. So I'm just kind of wondering what the plan is to do with a bunch of folks who are not Native who indicate being tribally enrolled.
I'm going to answer the second question first, which is about if you did not indicate that you're American Indian or Alaska Native, why we would include them in asking the questions about tribal enrollment. And it's because because this is the first time that the Census Bureau is collecting the data in sort of a census test in this way, and with these questions, that we wanted to see whether or not people who are not American Indian Alaska Natives are answering the tribal enrollment question. It's a feasibility test, and our study plan was written in such a way to see whether or not there are people who do not racially identify as American Indian Alaska Native if they are given to it in paper. So, you know, in an internet mode, we could do skip patterns, we can do that. But in paper, when they see it all, people who are not American Indian Alaska Native or don't even answer the race question could potentially see a potential tribal enrollment question and answer it. So we just wanted to see whether or not, or how often that might be happening, which is why we included them. And Miley, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to repeat your first question again.
Yeah, it's just, you know, the reason why many of us have expressed concern over the tribal enrollment question was because the United States government has forcibly made an effort to disenroll a very substantial amount of Native Americans, American Indians, Alaska Natives. And so focusing in areas where that has happened less, where relocation programs haven't been the sort of focus of the initiatives in that area, you might indeed miss the majority of people who have been affected by the policies of this government in order to disenroll people. So focusing in Alaska and not focusing on areas where there are a large concentration of urban Indians to specifically ask how tribal enrollment questions will force someone to feel that they cannot answer as an American Indian is a big concern. So I'm wondering if you are approaching this issue understanding that that is the background for what's happening, or if it's just sort of a, we're just trying to count people, versus understanding the reason why tribes and urban Indian communities are incredibly concerned about this happening. And I know there's been a lot of concern and a lot of backlash of people saying, do not do this, and yet we are moving forward with it regardless, and it's a concern.
No, and I think that is definitely a concern that we have heard at many NAC meetings, and also all of the different outreach that we've had, and we've heard it during the consultations. Dee Alexander will be presenting the consultation reports later this afternoon, so you'll get a lot more information there. But as far as the concern about especially, you know, with urban Indians who geographically may be spread out, we want to be really clear that the tribal enrollment questions that we were testing is separate from the race question, and that the race question has the American Indian and Alaska Native population who can self-identify their racial identities. And I think that because of the concerns that we have heard over the last few years, that is one of the, and the letter that came from National Congress of American Indians that definitely encouraged the Census Bureau from continuing or putting this on a census questionnaire in the future, is why for the 2018 end-to-end test, it is not being included. It was not included as part of the topics to Congress that was submitted at the end of March, I do believe. And so all the concerns that has been expressed, not only at NAC, but also during the consultations and with tribal leaders, is why it's not moving forward in the 2018 because it wasn't a part of the topics. But we are continuing the testing for 2017 just to continue and respect the request that came out of last decade's tribal consultations. We want to be able to finish out the project. We're going to be able to provide a final report, but it's not moving forward in any future endeavors.
Just because I'm getting NAC members yelling at me on the side here saying, answer her, ask for clarification, but by text message, and no, it's okay. If I understand this, you're not moving forward, but you're finishing up from what was initiated from before. So the response, from what I understand, has been a unanimous, this is not something that is wanted to go forward, yet we're going forward from behind. Understanding that we're doing from, I mean, you do understand how this may not make total sense to many of us, that we're still looking for the answer to this question, even though the question has been clearly, or the statement has been made that this is not something that people want to have looked at and examined by census. And I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. Am I not clear, Desi?
Right. So
Julie?
can I just jump in a little here? So I think there's a couple of things, some of which she's already mentioned. We're completing this body of research based on the request that came in too late in the decade last time, based on the test, but we did submit the topics without this in there, and that is because we only got programmatic needs if there was any request for that. So we had talked about some of that federal agency validation of content that would be on the census or on the ACS. this also did not have a mandatory or required need, along with some of the other things that you've mentioned. So I think it had stuff from all sides coming in, but we're completing this research, so there is something out there that has the findings on the testing that these guys have done, gals.
So I think Desi might have had just a follow-up question.
May I
on
just
this
ask,
on the-
so what will be done with this data then? Will it be accessible, or will anybody will anybody be able to use it?
I don't believe we're planning on releasing this data as like in a PUMS file or anything like that, but what we plan on doing with it is comparing the self-response data to the re-interview data to check for consistency, and then we plan on doing that analysis and writing a report on the results.
And then Arturo, and then we're a little behind, so we want to give you guys a break.
Thank you. So you just gave us a demonstration of what the online experience will be from a laptop, and I saw you had some difficulties in manipulating the mouse and so forth. How different is the experience going to be for somebody who's responding from a mobile device?
Part of what we're doing at this point, and will continue to do until the instrument is completely finalized, is to improve the user experience on mobile devices. It's already pretty good. That's, of course, the first way I go in whenever something comes up online, is to kind of see how it feels on the mobile. I certainly didn't have any issues with it. I don't think we've heard from others much that anyone else has had issues with it, but it is something that we're continually improving. We had a very short development window once we got the contractors on board to build this new self-response instrument in this new environment. And so we were focused primarily on getting the content right, getting the skip patterns correct, making sure that the data are flowing correctly behind the scenes, and did some work on the user experience, user interface, but did not get everything done that we would have liked. So there are a couple of things that I know I have on my wish list of things to maybe tweak and improve. But by and large, it looks pretty good on mobile as well.
Do you know when we'll be able to experience that, committee members?
We are looking to see if there are some opportunities to make it available to people who are not Census employees for a test period. I guess I'd ask Deb if you want to jump in on what those plans are.
So I think we're trying to put it, even if it's for a short period of time, I think Alexa, Jason, and I have been talking about, can we leave this up once we've closed out our data collection to provide just that opportunity that you're talking about. So the 17 tests, the end of the collection window is actually May 12th. So we would try and do something quick, but right after that. Good question.
Thank you.
Okay, Jerlene, and then we are going to take a break.
Okay, I just need to go back to the issue of completing the research that you began, and you have a cluster of things that you're moving through. And I just think it's important that you hear what our colleagues are saying about the potential confusion, disgruntlement, whatever goes along with doing this because you're finishing something for the sake of finishing it, and you've got a whole, almost unanimous cluster of people who are saying, don't do this. If you're doing it anyway, I think you really clearly need to have a plan for what are you going to say to people as to why you're causing this confusion. I just think you can't, finishing for the sake of finishing just doesn't sound adequate to me. I think you need some kind of high-touch explanation for what really sounds crazy.
Go ahead, Mrs. Vice Chair.
I just want to make one comment. Thank you, Jerry, for that comment. It's going to be really important for you to consider what you put in the report that you're planning to draft, because that report will have wide readership and people will interpret it. And, they will not know that this test was just a complete work that already the NAC has said we don't want to do, nor have the tribes. So I'd be very, very careful. I must say I'm pretty sensitive considering the budget conversation this morning and the completion of work that really is not relative to the decisions the census has already made. So I want to thank Jerry for that final comment and was trying to resist, but I could not. Thank you.
All right, so right now, let's take a 15-minute break and come back at 11:30. Thank you.